I used to think as an economist that economics is what it's all about. And later on, Bill Clinton would tell us during a presidential election that it's the economy stupid. Well, unfortunately, I wish that was the case. It is the politics stupid. But politics cannot be done without economics either. So they are kind of intertwined. But ultimately, it becomes a philosophical issue, doesn't it? I was asked in 2010 by Rutgers University, by a professor of moral philosophy, no less, somebody I didn't know, Martin Bunzel was his name. He said, we are having a seminar on the ethics of dynamic pricing. I said, you must have the wrong topic, either ethics or dynamic pricing, but both in one sentence, it doesn't seem to go together. He said, no, that's the issue today. And so I went, we spent a day, Bill Hogan, who some of you probably know, was my discussant. They actually asked him to be the speaker and me to be the discussant. He said, no, on this topic, I'm going to let him speak so then he can have the last word. And you know, Bill. There were 4 commissioners, there were 4 consumer advocates, and there were 4 utility people in that round table, and there were all kinds of people outside the round table. It was like living theater. It was videotaped for 8 hours. It was quite painful, very agonizing. And that was 2010. And here we are 2018. The pain hasn't lessened. And the challenge is about the winners and losers, the elephant in the room that we can't touch today, right? What I will do is I will share with you some ideas, some data, and some evidence from across the world to the extent that I could put my hands on it. I will, by design, not talk about Australia or New Zealand because I've made that mistake before, only to be reminded how little I know. And so, okay, so I will, in advance, just concede that to you. You can provide your perspectives. I've had the good fortune of talking to a lot of people around the globe, including several in this country and New Zealand. And Neil Lessam and I, Neil is back there, he's in our Sydney office, also an economist like me. We were visiting Vector in Auckland just a few days ago. Actually, I think it was Monday, wasn't it? Yeah, so we discussed some of these issues. We've picked up what their issues and concerns are. It's a river with many fish swimming in it. And the person who has informed me the most over the years is a person I've never met, who is very polite and kind to respond to my emails. So I want to acknowledge his thoughts in what I'm presenting. Stephen Littlechild, who I'm sure is no stranger to several of you, an amazingly responsive person. And the latest exchange I've had with him, didn't have time to put it in the slides, perhaps during the Q&A it might come out. It has to do with an idea that's very old, but it's being reinvented. Real-time pricing. There is a retailer in Great Britain whose name is Octopus, and don't ask me why, but that's their name. It's all those. So the Octopus has a product that basically gives you a guaranteed price, but if you want to lower your bill, you can avail yourself of the real-time price, and they'll work with you through your appliances, through your phone, whatever, and make it happen. So they don't have a lot of customers today. I think Neil had a chance to look into some of their data. The sample is very small, so we don't know how much we can learn from it, but there was a lot of response from certain customers who are appropriately technology capable and motivated to make things happen. Which is not to say that everyone's going to go for it. Many people prefer a price like a Netflix type of price or Amazon type of a price, Amazon Prime, for example, or a membership like for Costco. Do they have Costco here? So those are products, clearly, that we will talk about. And then the last thing I'll say again by way of introduction is I was at a meeting at a very large utility in the northeastern US with their senior executives. And the topic was tariff design for the future. Now, this is a utility that doesn't have smart meters, so there was a bit of a conundrum. You want to be really smart, but you have 1 foot in the last century, so how does that come into the picture? He said, well, don't worry about it, assume we have them. Okay, so we are liberated. The human imagination travels very fast, and it's almost free what you can think of, right? There is no cost to thinking, at least as far as I know. So then we start the discussion, and I talk about cost-reflective pricing. And the CEO of the utility looks at me and he says, I want to dispel one notion that you seem to be stuck with. I can't remember the exact words he used, but they were New Yorker kinds of words, so probably harsher than stuck with. And then basically the message was, I don't want to hear the term cost-reflective pricing. I said, oh, okay. I thought you were a regulated monopoly, and the purpose of regulation is to approximate free market behavior as best as possible, and what better way to do it than to base price on cost? He said, yeah, but Amazon doesn't do it that way, do they? Or Netflix, or all of those new products and services coming out. I said, well, as far as I know, none of them are regulated monopolies, number one. And then he agreed with that. And I said, number two, because the topic invariably was going to come up of fixed charges and demand charges, especially for a network utility that has nothing volumetric in the network. And so that was the case with this utility, and I'm doing my best not to name them because they may not want to be named, so hopefully it won't come out. So this person said to me, yeah, but are there fixed charges for United Airlines when you fly? Or for, taxi service or grocery shopping? Are there any demand charges for those? I said, the last time I checked, the answer was no, and probably still is no. But the last time I checked, they were not connected to you 24/7. There was no grid connecting you to United Airlines or Qantas or, what is the phone company here? Yeah, there you go. So, but those entities that are connected to you 24/7 are always there. You have to somehow find a way to recover their cost that is efficient and fair. So he said, okay, you can get going with the rest of the discussion. So I will get going here with the rest of the discussion. I have given this a title which doesn't exactly correspond to what you asked me to do, but I think it comes as close as I could make it come. And then the rest of the room will provide the dotted lines, I hope. Okay, modernizing distribution tariffs for households. I'm focusing on households or residential customers. Some of these ideas obviously apply to all customers, but the debate, the action, the excitement, the Julius Caesar moment is in the residential class. Distribution tariffs today are no different than those of the last century, and I'm sure I'm not the first one to mention that to you, but I have to begin with that. Just a reminder to me also, as much as to you, that my career, which began in 1979 and is approaching its 40th year next year, that has been the challenge all along, is the industry is very slow to change. The retailers were supposed to change it, and yes, they have in those markets in which they operate, but they're still nowhere close to what's happening in really competitive markets. And actually, in many markets, including yours, including the one in England, retail choice itself is coming under scrutiny, and I'm just picking up on the headlines. You know the story much better than me. Because of a concern of rising prices, the choices being made are not as good as they could be. People are concerned that they're being taken to the cleaners. All of those things are happening. So there is lack of trust. There's lack of enthusiasm. And the kind of customer satisfaction that an Apple iPhone generates or a Netflix subscription generates is nowhere to be found in the energy, electric utility retailing business. Is that a fair statement, or does anyone have a... Okay, I guess you're giving me the benefit of the doubt. Okay, so the classic tariff structure is very, very simple. The monthly fixed charge, usually very small. I noticed the word large has crept in there. It's just a monthly fixed charge. Usually it's very small. It's a typo. And in California, the charge is literally zero. And they have been struggling with how to have any fixed charge of any kind. Initially, a $3 a month fixed charge was proposed and rejected, even just before it was accepted by the lawyer, the general counsel for the Public Utilities Commission, who said this is unconstitutional in California. And sure enough, they discovered apparently it was in the state constitution that I've never read, that it was unconstitutional. And so they had to pass a law, and the law went through a lot of hearings. I took part in one of those public hearings and swore never to be part of a public hearing again. You can be asked questions by the public. They get in line, and they're going to do whatever they can to mess you up. Well, I wasn't their target. It was the utilities and the commission, but I got messed up too along the way because I was there, part of the industry, touched and contaminated. So they passed a law allowing $10 a month fixed charge. The utilities all proposed The utilities in California are vertically integrated. They tried to have choice, and then I'm sure you know the story, 2001 something happened. So the choice was frozen, and residential customers do not have choice. The only choice they have is to move elsewhere, or to put solar on the roof, or to do energy efficiency, but it's the same utility unless they move out of state. So they put a $10 fixed charge. Well, the $10 fixed charge is constitutionally authorized, but the Public Utilities Commission still has to authorize it. And the most they're going to do is perhaps $1, because, because they want to keep it low. And so that's where the politics comes in. I mentioned earlier the philosophy comes in as well, and the degree I really should have gotten and didn't was the PPE degree at Oxford, which is philosophy, politics, and economics. Does anyone have that degree here? That's the degree that really sums up the conundrum, the enigma of pricing reform, is how to deal with those multiple perspectives. So California is in a quagmire. I'll talk about some positive aspects soon. Now, what about distribution revenue? I'll try to focus on that as much as I can because of the setup here. So the bulk of the distribution revenue, as far as I know, for most networks, comes from the kilowatt hour charge. It's volumetric. Even though the bulk of distribution costs do not vary with the energy flowing through the wires. And that's not a very difficult concept to grasp, but it has become a politically charged concept, and people refuse to accept it. So we have a communication challenge on how to get that very basic idea across to the folks. In my own neighborhood and in my social media groups, I have many friends who have high bills. The average price of electricity in California now is 28 cents per kilowatt hour if you have a single family house in a sort of a warm climate. They have rates that vary by climate. And so all of them are looking at solar. And solar now has a payback of 5 years. And then they want to have a zero bill. And some of them are having a zero bill, and they're telling me excitedly, oh, my bill was zero. Don't you work with PG&E, Pacific Gas and Electric? I said, no, I don't. I consult with utilities around the globe, and yes, I do consult with them. Well, let them know that we have become independent of them, as if I'm some kind of a channel. Like a James Bond situation. PG&E already knows, so you don't have to tell them through me. But the reality is they are not grid independent. They're still connected to the grid. The sun does go down at some point. In most parts of the globe, it does. The most inhabited parts of the globe, it does go down. And so what you have is you have people thinking they are grid independent. One even told me at a barbecue, when I have a negative bill, I'm thinking, who is paying for your cost of being connected to the grid? I have figured out it's best not to tell them straight on their face, because it creates a lot of moral hazard. And then the one time I made the mistake of telling them I was testifying before the commission. That's why I had to leave the party early for the next day. And they said, you're testifying before the rogue agency. I said, well, it's not a rogue agency, but if yes, there have been some unfortunate email exchanges. Had I told them I was testifying on behalf of the utilities, you can imagine I would have ended up in the barbecue pit probably. So there's a lot of anxiety because of the high prices. And these people are engineers and smart technology owners. They understand the economics of their business, the technology, etc., but they are unwilling to take the time to understand the economics of the grid. As long as it helps them not to know, they will not be anxious to be educated. Okay, the tariff structure is predicated on 3 assumptions. In other words, why do we have this, if I can be allowed a few sort of off-color words, this nonsensical rate design? Well, the nonsensical rate design is there because we are told households cannot understand any other tariff design. Okay, households have to be treated with kids' gloves, and we have to be very paternalistic. They don't know how to drive a car, perhaps. That's why they need the self-driving car. They don't know how to cross a traffic light, and that's why the iPhone will tell them cross or not cross. Otherwise, they couldn't cross the light. They can't tell the difference between a red light and a green light. So that's item number 1. Item number 2, they have dumb meters. Now, somebody told me, who was previewing the slides internally at the firm, Brattle, never to use the term dumb. Well, too late, the slides are done. So we have, there is a very famous line from a commissioner in Washington, D.C., former commissioner Rick Morgan. He said, what is the point of having smart rates with, excuse me, got it backwards, having dumb rates with smart meters? Because Washington, D.C. has smart meters, but And then you can make a comment or two about how smart the politicians are who are there, but they do have smart meters, but they have dumb rates. By the way, the leading politician in the U.S. said something the other day. I'll leave him unnamed, which I found electrifying. And what did he say? This was just before the polls. He said there is electricity in the air. So apparently, wireless electricity is coming to the White House. Hasn't done his job yet. Okay. Third, networks cannot handle any other tariff design. Right? I'm told never to say those things, by the way. And it's being videotaped. Okay, utilities have begun modernizing tariffs, and I will do a quick survey beginning with North America, and some of this you will know, so I will go at a bit of a rapid clip, and feel free to ping me with the appropriate gestures. Ontario, Canada, 4 million people. Neil Lessam and I have worked assiduously with the folks there to look at their rate design options. They have a flat bill for distribution. In other words, just a fixed amount. A time of use charge for default energy supply. The differential is small. It's about 50% higher, peak versus off-peak. And 90% of the customers are on default supply. They have retail competition there, but 90% have chosen not to. They felt, taken advantage of. The deals were not attractive. Like if the peak price was 9 cents, and the off-peak was 3 cents, and the mid-peak was 6 cents, hypothetically speaking, and the retailer would come to them, and I have nothing against retailers, just what's happening in Ontario, according to what they told me. The retailer would come to them and say, we'll give you a 7-cent price for all hours. It's less than the 9-cent price that you would otherwise be paying. So soon enough, they would figure out and they'd go back to the default option. 90% are on it, and there's an observed measurable reduction year after year, more than 2%, between 2 and 3% a year reduction in peak demand for all residential customers. I should have figured it out too, thank you. Okay, Arizona, a very hot state in the southwest, home to the Grand Canyon. 20% of customers are on demand charges that are coupled with time of use energy charges, but the key feature is they have voluntarily, in their hot climate, accepted demand charges. And how do they cope with it? How do they cope with time of use pricing? 50% of the customers are on time of use pricing in Arizona. Some of them have 2 air conditioners. They have 100 days in which the temperature exceeds 100 degrees Fahrenheit, which would be roughly 32 degrees of whatever Celsius, I guess. So a little higher, 35. Yeah, it really cooks. I mean, I've been there. With my luck, I tend to be in the most challenging places. So I'll be in Toronto in January and in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia in July. And I've been to Arizona across all the temperatures. Why? Because of one simple reason: they get lower bills. And it's very easy to respond to a demand charge. The message is, don't use all your major appliances at the same time. And of course, some people don't know what a major appliance is, so the utility tells you what your major appliance is. It's your air conditioner, it's your clothes dryer, it's your oven, those 5 big ticket items, and your light bulbs are not a major appliance, even though the first thing that people will do is play with the light bulb. So, in Arizona, which is a really hot climate, they have voluntarily shown that this is a very successful program. They have made changes possible and practical. California has mandatory time of use rates plus a minimum bill for DG or distributed generation customers. They have to pay $10 as the minimum bill, and they complain bitterly to me about the $10. What's PG&E doing with the $10? That's the bonuses of their executives, isn't it, the $10? I said, your fixed cost of being connected to the grid is probably about $50 to $60. Oh no, that's hogwash. How could it possibly be? And we don't like those wires anyway. Wouldn't it be nice if they just went away? I said, well, you can try it. And actually, a person in Los Angeles, a very rich person, tried it. He spent $250,000 to become grid independent and still could not. The utility was Southern California Edison. Everyone was watching this experiment with great anticipation. And then he came out, he said, well, I guess it'll come eventually. We're not ready for it. So, in the meantime, you have to pay for the cost. Sacramento Municipal Utilities District is moving all of its customers to default time of use energy rates. The California investor-owned utilities have also started moving, but very, very slowly. And I think by 2020, they will have moved all of their residential customers to time of use rates, possibly with a 0 fixed charge, and definitely without a demand charge. But at least they would have then done in 2019 what they said they were going to do in 1979. Okay. Los Angeles Department of Water and Power, the largest municipal in the U.S., home to many, many innovative companies, Hollywood, et cetera, all of those things that we know and associate with Los Angeles, it has dumb meters. And it just cannot come up with the need to have smart meters. So they can't do any of these fancy rate designs. I was talking to one of their rates guys, George Chen, and he said, but we have come up with one solution which you will like. I said, what is it? I want to share it with folks in Sydney. So he said, what they have is a fixed monthly charge that varies with the size of the customer's usage. So it's a graduated charge. And so if you're a small volumetric user, you have to pay like about $8 a month, which is much better than the $0 a month that next door Southern California Edison customers are paying. But if you are a medium-sized customer, it goes up to $15. And if you're a large customer, then it can be as much as $23. How can they do it when the investor-owned utilities can't? Well, one's regulated by a commission, the other one has their board. So a lot of it depends on the institutional structure of the approval process for tariffs. It has nothing to do with economics. Okay, Colorado, Fort Collins becomes the first utility probably in the globe, certainly in the United States, to mandate time of use rates for all of its residential customers. They have something like 50,000. Last month, which was October, they rolled it out. The customers have not gotten their bills, right? There's a lag. So in November, you might want to Google Fort Collins a few times on Google News and just see if the mayor is still in office or has been, let's put it this way, violently removed from office. They seem very confident that it'll work. They have done a pilot, they have done their outreach, and they're very confident it'll work. I think I forgot to mention an important aspect of Ontario. As I mentioned, they have distribution charges that are totally flat, fixed amounts. And I asked the Ontario Energy Board, how did you pull it off? They said we had a lot of outreach meetings. We talked to a lot of people, and we explained why these charges are fixed, because the cost is fixed. It is only fair that the charge be fixed. I said, they just accepted your story? They said, well, one person didn't, but all of the others did. I said, I'm interested in knowing what that one person said. They said, you probably don't want to know. I said, no, I do want to know. They said, well, it's somewhat unprintable. I said, go ahead. So they said, F you. I said, oh, okay, nothing much there. He said, no, he spelled it out. I said, oh, okay, so some spit came out with it too? So it can be difficult at times, but it has been done. It requires an outreach and a thicker skin than you probably want to have. Okay, and that's where in the commissions it doesn't happen. Okay, Idaho, Kansas, and Montana, those three, all of them have approved that the class of customers that have DG or solar on their roof are a separate class, different load shape, a lot lower energy consumption, no lower peak demand, inverted duck curve, and so they're a separate class and they'll get a separate tariff. Kansas has approved it. Idaho is looking, well, Idaho has also created a separate class but not approved a tariff design, and Montana has just filed the application asking for the same treatment. Okay, so last slide on North America. New York, they are doing the same conversation as everyone else, and they have started to move their DG customers to either demand charges or TOU energy charges. They haven't done it yet. They're having workshops, and the workshops are going to expected to run for 2 years. That's somewhat interesting, right? 2 years to have workshops. 2 years full of workshops on the same topic over and over again. How many workshops do we need? And then 4 years ago, they had a big conference to celebrate the beginning of the REF process, and I spoke at that process, and Audrey Zilberman was the chair of the commission at the time, a great enthusiastic person. She's here somewhere in Melbourne now. The process has begun to move slowly, and so stay tuned as to what happens in New York. You have Oklahoma, which is in the middle of the United States, just north of Texas. Not known for its innovations in energy efficiency or anything in particular other than oil and gas. Well, lo and behold, they have pulled off the biggest upset in the history of tariff design in the United States, California and New York included. They have left them in the dust. They have dynamic pricing, voluntary with smart thermostats, and 20% of the customers have availed themselves of that offering. So the secret, I discovered, is marketing, messaging, and communication. I have sat next to passengers on planes coming into Oklahoma City, been in taxi rides, and people when they of course ask me why I'm coming to Oklahoma. I guess nowhere else do I get asked why are you coming, but to Oklahoma you will be asked why are you coming to Oklahoma. Maybe it's not a tourist destination. So basically the conversation turns to electricity, and then I start getting these positive accolades about OG&E's rate design program. So it can be done. Electricity is not that difficult to communicate. Arizona has shown it can be done, and Oklahoma has shown it can be done. Texas. So Texas is looking at Ontario and thinking of having a flat bill for distribution charges. But they have been looking at the mirror for 2 years now, so I don't know what the hesitation is. I think I'm going there in January to find out. Okay, a quick snapshot of Great Britain. UK Power Networks piloting a peak time rebate program targeted at low-income customers. A couple of pilots have tested other types of time-varying rates in response to the wind twinning or twining. How would you pronounce it? Twining, twinning, both? Okay, twining. Okay, so intended to encourage consumption changes when electricity prices suddenly change with wind generation changing. Okay. And some of the rates being tested are dynamic in nature. I really think that time of use pricing of the traditional sort will have no future because of the renewable energy ups and downs with wind and solar both. Plus technologies like the smartphone are available. New homes will have gadgets inside the house. Every appliance, whether you want it or not, will have digital IP addresses that the home phone can control. So I think real-time pricing will really leave time of use pricing in the dust. Ofgem, the regulator, we've had some discussions with them recently, but they are looking at ways to increase the role of price-responsive demand. Retail choice has not brought with it as much price-responsive demand as people had thought that it would. Okay. They still have the Economy 7 rate, which has been there, as Stephen Littlechild put it in his email to me yesterday. He said, since times immemorial, by which he meant 1978. So, which for some of us is probably times immemorial. So that was only for customers with thermal energy storage. Of course, now it's being broadened. A startup retailer has introduced a TOU tariff with a strong price signal. That's the one I briefly mentioned, Octopus. British Gas offers a free time tariff. Pick one weekend day in which electricity will be free. Again, ways to engage and excite the customer. It's like a promotion. And then a pilot tested the Sunshine tariff, which charged the lower price during midday hours to alleviate local distribution system constraints due to excess solar generation. And the same thing is happening in Hawaii, by the way. The afternoon price is now a lower price. And I remember back in 2013, I spoke at a conference in Berlin, and I had my chart showing high prices in the afternoon, and a person got up from the back. He said, we have negative prices in the afternoon. I said, okay, I need to just flip the chart, and then it becomes your case. So, I mean, we are seeing inversions faster than we could have imagined of accepted concepts. But something that has not inverted is the following. Customers respond to price. When it's high, they use less. When it's low, they use more. That has been established, and established regardless of when the peak period is. In Hong Kong, CLP Power has run a pilot that Neil and I were engaged to look at for peak time rebates. It showed that customers respond just like customers anywhere else. So the arguments I get every time a new pilot is conceived is we are different. Our geography is different. Our socio-demographics are different. In their case, it was we have a lot of high rises. Half the population lives above the 15th story and so on. Well, even there, they found a way to respond. And now they're rolling it out to thousands of customers. Okay, in the EU, millions of customers in Spain are on a real-time pricing tariff, which is essentially the default energy supply option. But as I just heard yesterday from Littlechild, it has not been promoted well, so customers don't know what the prices are, or when they are high, when they're low, unless they go on a website. It's not being communicated in a friendly way, so many of them are using more at the peak time, when it costs more. Okay? So that's what you get when you don't have the educational apparatus going with it. Italy has the same situation. They have a default time of use rate, very small differential, but no one knows about it. So those are terrible examples, and I'm only mentioning them because you can always improve the way you do it. If you decide to go down a certain path, first thing to do is engage with the customer and educate and inform them, get the media on your side, and then the message spreads by itself on social media. So, with looking at all of that, some general themes have begun to emerge. Finally, we are seeing modern tariffs being rolled out, sometimes by utilities, sometimes by retailers, and sometimes by both. Depends on which country you're looking at. The second major theme is customers understand modern tariffs. All this fear about the customer not understanding tariffs is not well placed. They respond to them as well. As I said, when the price is high, they use less. When the price is low, they use more. Not everyone does, but enough do that it makes a difference. So what modern tariff design does is enhances economic efficiency. People get the right price signal. And it also promotes equity between customers. So nobody's subsidizing somebody else unknowingly. I think that's the catch, unknowingly. If people know there's a subsidy, that's a different story. Like the tax code is well known what the subsidies are through the tax code. Through electric tariffs, they are hidden and obfuscated, and people just don't know what the true picture is. And that's unfortunate. So modern tariff design, as I see it, encompasses three elements. If you have an energy charge, it should be time varying. Demand charges to recover capacity costs, and fixed charges to recover the costs of what some people call revenue cycle services, or metering and billing and customer care. I'll go through these quickly. You will have the deck, of course, and this is much too detailed to look at. There is a desire by part of all utilities to move fixed, to make sure that fixed costs are recovered through fixed charges. There is a mountain of evidence that customers respond to tariff structures. And this is just the mountain of evidence. I'll show you the evidence in a moment. This is just the number of pilots that have been done. The number is above 300 now. This is a global count that we keep going, and we are not always up to date. I'm sure there are more than 400 by now, but this is the best we have. And what we find is the magnitude of demand response varies by price ratio and rate design. So there is variation across prices, and I'll show you a graph. So this is a graph where we have a scatter, and the scatter is quite heterogeneous, but it's sufficiently tight from a statistical standpoint that you can, through regression analysis, estimate these demand curves. They're nonlinear, and the demand curves show that as you raise the price ratio, you use more, as you raise the price ratio, you use less and less in the peak. And what you have is the solid blue. The darker blue, I should say, is the price-only curve, no enabling technology. And the lighter blue is the one where people were given some enabling technology, in most cases a smart thermostat. So technology doubles the amount of response you're going to get. Demand charges, I'll just briefly say that in Europe, and some of you probably know this already, France, Italy, and Spain are three examples. They have a connection charge, which is essentially a demand charge based on the connection. In the US, we have demand charges being offered by more than 30 utilities. And in some cases where you have solar on the roof, they're mandatory for those customers. The big question that always arises is, will customers understand a demand charge? And as I've said to you, these 30 utilities have customers on those demand charges. These customers don't have PhDs in anything. They're not required to go to graduate school to understand a demand charge. All they're required to understand is a light bulb, and the capacity of the light bulb is expressed in watts. I think just about everyone understands that. And so if you make the connection that a watt is a measure of demand, and then you have the kilowatt hours coming from how many hours that bulb is on, then you figure out that it all started with watts, and then it went to watt hours. So simple explanations are very easy to come up with, and you can do focus groups to define the messaging. It's not that difficult. So this is the 22 states that are offering demand charges in the US to residential customers. There are some notable exceptions like California. They don't even have fixed charges there. They want to have free electricity very soon in California. Jerry Brown is on a mission. So we have had some experiments with demand charges. They are a bit old, but they are being presented here, and I'm showing you the range of impacts that they have produced. And then we have developed a simulation model working with utilities to estimate the impact of demand charges. And the big question that arises is the pink elephant in the room question about winners and losers. This is the only slide I have on the subject. Hopefully that will pass muster here. So what we have is, with a fixed charge, when you impose a higher fixed charge, the smaller customers are going to see a higher bill, right? And with a demand charge, it's a bit more muted. because customers can respond to a demand charge by lowering their demand, whereas with a fixed charge they can't. And so the impact is still higher on smaller customers, but not quite as dramatically higher as it would be with a pure fixed charge. Okay, so demand response, of course, nobody wants to have losers. And certainly the losers don't want to lose, but the people who take care of the loser community, let's put it that way, it's an unfortunate term that I'll probably never use again, but so obviously everybody wants to have winners and only winners. And it's not just the losers themselves, but also the optics for the regulators, for the politicians, and all of the social media organizations. So what do? Well, you find ways to mitigate the losses, because most of those calculations that you see for the bill impacts assume zero price elasticity. They assume no response to price, which we know is not correct. So you bring in demand response, and it'll cushion the impact on the losers. So as we come to a close, just a couple of remaining slides. Modern tariffs come in several textures. There's a flat bill. There's a subscription service. There's a subscription service with demand response, and that perhaps could become the hottest item, and we can talk more about that during Q&A. And of course, you have demand charges. You could be non-coincident peak, or you could be coincident peak, or a combination. You could have a fixed monthly fee and a demand charge, or you could have a fixed monthly fee, a demand charge, and a time-varying energy charge. The message that I have picked up from all of my conversations at conferences and workshops like this and reading the literature is no two customers are alike. Give them choices. And choice will eliminate the political tussle that sets in with a mandatory flash cut. So the problem is, how do we start the transition? I think we were exchanging emails, Lynn and I, and she said most people understand the need for cost-reflective tariffs. They understand what are those cost-reflective tariffs. The problem is, how do we get started on the journey? This is a plane that doesn't fly until the propeller spins. We admire the plane, the landing gear, and the fuel is all in there, and the pilot is brilliant. But unless the propeller spins, the plane doesn't take off. So how do we get the propeller to spin? So here is the challenge. It won't be easy, since any change in tariffs will create winners and losers, which empowers the status quo and makes it impregnable. So you can't move, because you're going to lose somebody in the process. And even if it's one person out of 1 million, they will shout and scream. So how do we deal with that? So the first thing I recommend is begin by estimating the bill impacts of the modern tariffs you're considering on a representative distribution of customers. In the appendix, which I will not have time to show, the New York utilities have done the homework for the new tariffs they're talking about, demand charges as well as time of use charges, just for distribution. And they have shown the bill impact. So that's the kind of analysis that some of you probably have done. Others might want to think about doing it. Okay. Then re-estimate the bill impacts by simulating demand response estimates. And I have an appendix where I have an example for a utility in Colorado called Xcel Energy that shows how demand response can be estimated, either by looking at the experiments, the 300 experiments done elsewhere, or by simulating that in a modeling framework or some other approach. It will improve the shape of the bill distribution impacts. And then, after you've done all of that homework, you do some pilots to improve your local understanding of customer acceptance and demand response. So with all of the background done, this is my closing slide, how do you actually start the transition? All of that was homework. Now the homework's done, and the day has arrived when you're in front of either the commission or the board or the government or the ministry or whatever, and you don't want to be on the headlines the next day, right? So roll out the modern tariffs gradually, and proceed the rollout with an extensive customer education in a media and stakeholder outreach campaign. You have to get them on your side. Enough people have fallen on the sword by bypassing those organizations. Provide bill protection for the first year, so nobody's going to get a higher bill. Okay? And then phase it out over the next 3 to 5 years. It's like the training wheels on a bicycle for a kid. You know, they figure out how to do the balancing, and then they're on their own. Make the modern tariffs mandatory for the largest customers. If you think they are the ones causing the highest cost in the system, make it mandatory for them. Opt in for the vulnerable customers, and the default tariff for everyone else. Now, when you and I were working on that report, I thought that was a brilliant philosophical breakthrough. It had its own roadblocks that, as we discovered, came with time, but I thought that was a brilliant way of solving the deadlock that otherwise is there. I think it probably needs to be revisited, is at least the thought I have. And then here is the last one, and I owe this to Neil. So Neil has done a project, which perhaps in the discussion he can talk about, in which the tariff is structured in 2 stages. And keep in mind, I'm not saying parts, because sometimes when you say a 2-part tariff, people think of a fixed charge and a demand charge, or a fixed charge and an energy charge. So I'm not saying parts, I'm saying stages, just to use a different term. And the first stage is each customer, now it assumes you have a smart meter. If you don't have a smart meter, it assumes you have some kind of meter. And so if you have just a regular analog meter, then your consumption history is known. If you have a smart meter, then your load shape history is known. So whatever history is known, that becomes the first stage. And you will pay, you essentially buy that in a forward transaction, right, to use a wholesale market analogy. You just lock it in. Okay? You can live your life, just you've always lived your life, and pay the same amount. So there is no loser situation. Also, there is no winner. So that's what happens, is when you have no losers, you have no winners either. But that's fine. Many people don't want to either win or lose. They just want to live the life that they've always lived. Why? Don't ask me, but some people are like that. I used to fight with them. I've given up. That's just how it is. 1/3 of the population seems to be in that category, most surveys indicate. Don't bother me. Don't come in front of me. Just go away, right? I want to read my novel. I don't want to think about electricity. The studies indicate that the average person, and I really question those studies, but it has been cited globally over and over again by a very large consulting firm, so I will mention it here too, and I'm sure you've heard it before. 8 minutes a year is what the average person spends thinking about their electricity bill. Okay? 8 minutes a year. So that's less than a minute a month. So in other words, during some months they're not thinking about it at all. It's on auto bill pay, right? And then when it becomes a threshold higher amount, then they wake up, they say, oh, I need to do something. And that's probably true, right? I mean, it may be true for more than 1/3 of the people. So those people don't want to either win or lose. And so the first stage, they live their life like they've always lived it, happily ever after. And then comes the second stage. In the second stage, you buy deviations from your historical baseline. And that deviation is purchased at the spot price. And it's a real-time price. Some people are calling this transactive energy. Some people are calling this blockchain. And I'm sure it goes with many other names. But basically, this idea is not particularly original. It has already been in place in Georgia for decades, going back to the early 90s for large C&I customers. Commercial industrial customers. They've had real-time pricing in 2 stages. The first stage is a historical tariff. The second stage is the dynamic tariff. And every time they tell me that the price goes about $1 a kilowatt hour, retail price, load for those customers drops by 17%. Is the threshold. And there are now 2,600 customers on that tariff. Now, of course, they have sophisticated energy management tools, systems, etc. It goes back to the early 90s. A man from South Africa actually rolled out that idea. He had done that in South Africa with Eskom, with their mining customers, the very large mines. Well, the good news is that idea now can be applied to small residential customers who have smart appliances, smart devices, and smart mines. Thank you.